I believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear them. So come with me as we take a walk down Fascination Street.
Welcome back, folks. This is a very special episode. This is the 100th episode of Fascination Street Podcast. I want to thank everybody for sticking with me for this long. It's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot of things and got to meet a lot of new cool people. Some of them I'm still friends with, so that's awesome. I couldn't just get any guests for the 100th episode of Fascination Street Podcast, so today I bring to you the undisputed king of podcasting. That's right, Adam Carolla was cool enough to call in and chat with me while he was driving from one job to the next. Adam's a busy man, so he didn't have a ton of time for me, but I still got about 20 minutes out of him, so that's a pretty good day in my book. As I mentioned, he was in his car, so there is a little bit of road noise in the background, but I think I pretty much got all of it out. So let's get right to it. You know him from Loveline. You know him from syndicated morning radio. You know him from Crank Yankers and from The Man Show. And for the last 10 years, you know him as the Podfather, host of the most successful podcast in history. This is the 100th episode of Fascination Street Podcast with special guest, the one, the only, Adam Carolla.
Yeah, talk to me, yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Adam Carolla
Should be consumers.
Down Fascination Street.
And now,
Adam Carolla.
Steve,
Adam, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing good.
Are you enjoying your morning?
Nah, it's been hectic, but I'll just say it's been hectic.
I know you got places to be and things to do, so I don't want to add to your hectic day, so let's just get right into it, all right? Thank you so much for squeezing me in. I know you're a very busy guy, but I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me for a little bit on my 100th episode, so thank you very much. And let's get right to it. I know you got a lot of stuff to do.
Thanks.
Thank you, Adam, for taking the time out to hang out with me on Fascination Street.
So back in, I believe it was February of 2009, I had fairly recently started listening to podcasts, and I had found a show called The Don and Drew Show. And it was a young married couple named Don Maselli and Drew Domkus, and they lived on a farm, I think it's in Wisconsin. And I had known you from The Man Show and Loveline and Crank Yankers, mostly from Loveline. Anyway, they were doing a daily podcast, and back then, at that time, Adam, you were on terrestrial radio as a widely syndicated morning show, but you weren't syndicated in San Antonio, so I wasn't listening. And one day, Drew Domkus was very excited because he was listening to the Adam Carolla morning show on terrestrial radio. And Adam, you announced that I guess that was going to be your last show that Friday, and that starting Monday, you were going to start a podcast. And I got very excited. And so thanks to Drew Domkus, I was able to tune in and be there from the very first show. So a little shout out and a thank you to Drew Domkus and Don Maselli from the Don and Drew Show. Thanks, guys. And here we are, coming up on 10 years later. I've never missed a show. And in those 10 years, I've seen you perform live 6 or 7 times. I've met you 4 or 5 times. I tweet you all the time. You like and retweet all the time and answer me. And I just want to say you're really doing it right, man. You're still in my eyes, a man of the people, even though you are the undisputed king of podcasting. So thank you very much, sir.
Thanks. And I do see your tweets all the time.
So when you first started doing the podcast, it was a little bit of the Wild Wild West, and that had to be pretty tough, especially in the beginning. So, like, what made you decide to venture into podcasting?
I knew that, so when I was ending my radio career, I was told that I had, each month they would come in and they would say, you have 20 million minutes of streaming or 18 million minutes of streaming, the month before. And then they would tell us they didn't care about streaming because they were a radio station. But I'd always thought, well, that's got to be worth something, right? All those million minutes of streaming got to be worth something, right? So when I left, I was essentially podcasting while I was doing my terrestrial radio show because people were streaming the show in Hawaii and Chicago and other places the terrestrial radio show wasn't on. So I was essentially podcasting while I was on the radio. My plan was not to lose connection with my audience that I'd built up over the years. And that was it. It was just literally stay connected to the audience.
Technology wasn't as far along as it is today. So that kind of bandwidth, that kind of data and those downloads, at that point, at the very beginning, it was costing you upwards of $10,000 a month. And so what gave you the confidence that this wouldn't be a losing endeavor?
I don't know.
Does that make sense? Like, what gave you the confidence to know that this would work, that it would pay off, and that you aren't just flushing tens of thousands of dollars down the drain when you were under contract, so you couldn't really charge for the podcast or even make money on it, because you had to finish out your contract with, I guess it was CBS Radio. But I guess what I'm asking is, what gave you the confidence that spending those tens of thousands of dollars for the next, at least 10 months was going to end up being beneficial?
I don't know that I had confidence in it, and I don't know that I thought it was going to pay off either. I just sort of thought I could do it. I never think in terms of it's going to work or it's going to pay off. I never really think in those terms. I'm going to do it because I'm going to do it. I don't have any real thoughts of it's going to pay off in almost any facet of life. All I think is I'm going to do this.
You hear people all the time looking back at the beginning of their career, no matter what it is. And, they kind of say, well, I knew it was going to work. I knew it would work out. Or, they kind of say they knew all along that they just trusted themselves and they knew they could do it. Was it kind of like that? Like you just trusted yourself, or was there something in you that you just knew that if you bet on yourself that it would be a safe bet?
I don't want to criticize those who know it's going to pay off, but I have no idea who knows what's going to pay off and when.
That makes sense. Well, in a recent episode, you said that basically you went from making $12,000 to roughly $500,000 in a year. And so I guess my question is, how did you not blow through all of that like a first-year pro athlete would?
Or like a lottery winner would, on parties and hookers and blow, and traveling and entourages?
Well, I did blow through it, but I blew through it in the form of a home and renovation and, and property and that kind of stuff. So it was sort of stuff that I knew about and wanted to do and had some value, and I had some skill in that arena being a former carpenter. So I was blowing through all my money, but I was blowing through all my money in a house in the Hollywood Hills that ended up being worth 3 times as much as I bought it for. So I did blow through my money, but it was going somewhere.
Gotcha. So you basically grew up, poor, and I wonder how come you didn't, just squirrel away terrified all of your money, like
You know, like a Dr. Drew, like a scared Dr. Drew is afraid to spend money. How come you didn't freak out like that since you kind of grew up without?
I think the way I'm wired is I have to have some sort of financial meter running at all times to entice me to get out, get to work, and get busy, and do side jobs and work weekends and that kind of thing. So the way I'm wired is I spend money on cars and warehouses and projects, and that then motivates me to work weekends and take side gigs and do projects that I'm already kind of too busy to do.
That makes sense. So I guess is it safe to say that you're focused more on making more money for the future rather than saving the money that you already have? Like, I guess, you know, Dr. Drew talks about how he was, you know, terrified of going to the poorhouse or whatever, so he sort of adjusts his spending and kind of saves a lot. That's the way he makes it sound. And so I guess you, instead of squirreling away and saving, you're just buying these things and spending this money and sort of gaining these assets gives you something to strive for, something like a reason to get up and go to work and make even more money. I kind of butchered that, but how would you break that down to some simple, you know, working versus saving kind of financial advice?
I'm not in save a nickel mode. I'm in make a buck mode. And I realized with my parents, they were always in save a nickel mode. Or I don't even think they were in any mode financially, but they didn't spend money. They didn't make money. And my thing is I feel like I will rise to the occasion, but I need there to be an occasion. And that's how I sort of work financially.
All right. Well, that's a good answer. Now let's talk a little bit about the Paul Newman race cars. So I have been fortunate enough to go to both of your warehouses, and I have had the amazing experience of getting to see all of your cars, even that gorgeous Hawaiian Tropic Porsche 935. And I got to take as many pictures as I want. I got to touch them, breathe on them, and that was super amazing, and I really appreciate that. So, how many Paul Newman cars are there, and how many of them do you have?
I have 10, and as far as how many are there, it really kind of depends on how deep you want to define them in terms of, like, how many did he drive once, how many did he drive for a whole season, which one did he drive at Daytona, which one was his car, but he never really raced it, he took possession of it, but he never campaigned it. I mean, there's kind of some stories out there. So it's really hard to definitively say, you know, this is a Paul Newman race car, when maybe it was someone else's car and he was one of the 3 drivers who drove it at Daytona in 1987. So that's a car that Paul Newman raced won. But is it a Paul Newman car?
Okay, so in a case like that where several people drove a car, what does make it a, quote, Paul Newman car?
Well, it's got his name on it, and it's got 2 other drivers' names on it, and it's kind of cool.
All right. Well, that definitely does make it cool. So I know that you and previous guests of this show, Matt the Motorator DeAndrea, sort of put your heads together and decide which cars to go after. So how do you guys narrow it down as to which cars are important enough for you to collect?
You know, I think you start with his team cars he drove for the season.
All right. How many are there, and how many do you have?
I have most of those cars. He won 4 drivers' championships, and I have 3 of them, but there's still a couple significant Newman cars. Some have been destroyed. There's a handful of those cars, but there's a couple of Z cars out there that he drove in the early 80s, late 70s that I do not own.
Other than, I know that there's one out there that a guy wants way too much money for. Other than that one, are there any other Paul Newman cars that you have your eyes on?
Not per se. There's stories and stuff spread about, but there's really nothing in particular that I'm looking at. Nothing. I sort of suspect that I have 10 Newman cars, and that's probably about where the number's going to stop, because now everyone is caught on, and everyone wants an arm and a leg, and they're very expensive, and I just suspect it'll be the 10.
Gotcha. Now that you've owned and driven a lot of his cars, and you are probably maybe the foremost Paul Newman racing historian out there, if he was alive and you could ask him one question about anything at all, even if it's car related, what would that be?
Oh, I don't know. I never think in those terms, because it's too fantastical to me. He used to, if you see pictures of him racing, you'll always see that his right hand had a bunch of tape on it, with a thing sort of in his palm and some tape.
Or since you do actually race those cars, is there anything about maybe his pre or post race mindset that you would want to know more about?
I've heard some stories where he would tilt a few once he got out of the car.
Interesting. All right, moving on a little bit. You're coming up on your 10-year anniversary of the Adam Carolla Show, and you're somewhere around 2,500 episodes in. And you also have several other podcasts that you host. So in all of those podcasts in all of those years, is there a clear favorite guest or a favorite episode?
I have ones I like better than others. I don't know that I have a favorite. I mean, David Allen Greer always makes me laugh. Joe Coy doing Bung Lu Sue always makes me laugh. Kyle Dunnigan doing Bill Maher makes me laugh hysterically. So I have a lot of ones that I like, but I'll just say those three guys, when they're doing their characters, probably make me laugh the hardest.
Gotcha.
Hey, streetwalkers. Well, you're not literally streetwalkers, but now that I've got your attention, I am Stephen O'Reilly, and I have a podcast called the Bar Star Podcast. And since you're listening to the Fascination Street podcast, I think you should check out my show. It's just as interesting without all the famous people, because Steve has connections that I just do not have. But if you dig podcasts about music, working musicians, and other random shit that I decided to talk about, based around music, of course, because that's what I do. I'm a working musician for the past 30 years, then you need to check out the Bar Star Podcast. You can get it wherever you get your podcast, on any platform, and make sure you check out barstarpodcast.com. Now back to the one and only Steve Owens and whatever the hell he was talking about.
Well, if I had to pick a favorite of all of the thousands of podcasts that you've done and that I've listened to, I would say when you had Kevin Smith on. And the reason for that is that there was all of this build up for probably about 2 weeks, because both of you had a daily podcast at the time, and I was listening to both of them at the time, and it was kind of going back and forth, a little trash talking on each show. And then when it culminated in you inviting Kevin onto your show, that was like the most amazing thing, just because of, like I said, of all the buildup. Other than that, of course, my favorite is the Gavin Newsom episode, because that was just genius.
Oh, yeah. Well, the thing that's funny about, like, the Kevin Smith thing, it's funny that people have opinions. He said, she said, Adam probably misunderstood, I could understand, whatever. There's only one way that went down.
Well, that was a long time ago, and it was many, many episodes ago. So for those listening who maybe aren't familiar, what exactly did happen?
He did my show. He asked after my show if we could do a show together. Some months later, I found out about a show we could do together. I contacted him. We both got favored nations. We both had contracts. There was no money dispute whatsoever. I didn't ask for more money. I never thought about it.
The contracts are the same. You get paid the same.
So did he call you and tell you that he wanted like different terms, like a different split or something?
He never called me in his life. He never had my phone number. He never reached out to me. He never called. We had no contact.
Well, whatever that project was would have been amazing, I think, because you guys are two of the biggest names in podcasting, and that would have just brought millions of viewers. And I personally think that show could have been amazing. So what happened?
He wanted to do the show with somebody else, so he made up an excuse to get me and to get someone else in. That's the story. There's no other version of the story. It drives me nuts when people do there's his version and their version and that version. How could I have a version? I reached out to him. He went in and took a meeting with Telepictures and never reached out to me. I went in and took a meeting with Telepictures and I reached out to him.
So how did it all fall apart?
When I got my meeting done with Telepictures, I sent him an email. I gave him my phone number and I said, call me now. Let me tell you about it. His version of I called Adam and he never called me back, he never called. He sent an email.
Well, he hasn't mentioned it in a long time as far as I know, but when he did mention it, years ago, he did say that the deal fell through because of contract negotiations. Could he maybe have misunderstood what happened?
Whatever version he's telling you about agents and wanting more money and holding out and contract, all a complete and utter lie. It went one way. It went one way only. It went the way I said it went. He put $500,000 in his pocket. I never got a penny. And he did the show with the people he wanted to do the show with. That's the only way that went down.
Well, I know that isn't your favorite subject to talk about, so I really do appreciate you, talking about that with me. And who knows, maybe after his recent near-death experience, he's come back around to your side. But thanks for talking about that with me. I appreciate it.
Well, it's not one side. It is a story. It's like World War II. It went down this way. You can spin it any way you want, but then there's the way it went.
Well, I don't hear any more road noise, so I'm assuming that means you got to wherever you were going. And I think I've kept you long enough. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your super busy day. I know that you squeezed me in going from one job to another, so I really, really appreciate that. And, I just want to thank you for, literally thousands and thousands of hours of entertainment between all of your podcasts and all of the years and, just the different shows that you've done. And again, thank you so much for being really kind and super cool to me when I was there and when I have seen you a few times before.
I have to do a podcast, Steve, unfortunately, so I got to cut this short.
Well, I'm a huge fan, and I will be listening until you stop podcasting, so I look forward to whatever you're about to go record today, sir. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, and thanks for listening. I appreciate it.
Have a great day, Adam. Hey guys, this is Steve Owens from Fascination Street Podcast here with a very important message. I'm awesome. I bet you thought I was going to say something else, but nope. What's important here is that I am awesome. I started this show because I truly believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear those stories. In the short time I've been doing this show, I've interviewed actors, directors, writers, inventors, podcasters, musicians, pro athletes, Olympic athletes, actual war heroes, even a Bond girl and a luthier, whatever the hell that is, and of course, regular people. From people who wanted to be stars but never gave it a real try, to big company CEOs and people who got to meet their favorite president. I love getting to meet and speak with people who have a story to tell. I feel like everyone does, and it's my job to get them to tell it. You never know who my next guest will be. An Academy Award-winning actor, a platinum-selling musician, or your own mother-in-law. But one thing is for certain, you will be fascinated by their story. So come take a walk with me down Fascination Street. You can find Fascination Street Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and of course, FascinationStreetPod.com. Opening music is the song Magnolia from the 2014 album Intransigence, used with permission from Douglas Miles Clark. Closing music is Apollo from the 2001 album Into the Known by the band Sapphire. Thanks for hanging out with us and getting to know a little bit about our guest. We'll see you next time on Fascination Street.